The dinner was supposed to be a reunion, the first one in years. My son Ethan sat across from me, his wife Victoria beside him, both wearing smiles polished enough to blind a stranger. Between the silverware and the flicker of candles, I almost believed this was peace. Then my phone vibrated under the table. A message lit up the screen, plain and sharp as a commandment. "Stand up. Leave now. Don't tell your son." For a moment, the room disappeared. I stared at those words, my pulse crawling up my throat. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was memory, 40 years of surviving bad neighborhoods, bad deals, and bad men. Instinct had saved me before. It was screaming again now. I looked at Ethan. The boy I'd once carried on my shoulders had grown into a man who measured everything in profit. Beside him, Victoria raised her glass, her smile soft, but her eyes assessing cold. "To family," she said. The crystal clinked. My hands shook beneath the tablecloth. I didn't ask who sent the message. I didn't ask why. I just obeyed. "Excuse me," I said quietly. Old stomach, rich food. I rose from the table, every movement deliberate, rehearsed. The chandelier hummed above me. In my vest pocket, Eleanor's pocket watch ticked against my heart, steady, patient, alive. The hallway stretched like a tunnel. I could smell lilies and money. I reached the front door and stepped into the night. Cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean. Behind me, laughter echoed from the dining room, too bright, too practiced. 30 minutes later, red and blue lights washed over that mansion. Police at the door, questions, confusion, and me alive because I had listened to silence when it whispered leave. Back home, the city felt smaller, quieter, in a way that made the truth easier to breathe. My row house in Queens was no palace, but it was mine. The walls held stories no one could buy or steal. I hung my coat by the door and stood for a moment, letting the sound of the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator remind me that I was still alive. Soap bubbles clung to my hands as I washed the same cup I used every evening. One cup, one plate, one fork. A widower's ritual. My late wife Eleanor used to fill this kitchen with her laughter, a sound that softened the edges of even the hardest days. Now the silence pressed in close. I sometimes caught myself talking to her picture, pretending she still sat across the table, asking about my day, scolding me for forgetting to eat. Above the sink hung a faded photograph. My son Ethan smiling in his cap and gown, one arm around Eleanor. I'd taken the picture myself, trying not to cry. It was the last time we had been a family. Back then, he was ambitious, hopeful. Before the arguments, before the money, before the silence. A year ago, Ethan had stormed out of this house after I refused to lend him $50,000 for a startup idea that already smelled like failure. I built my business 5 pawn shops across Brooklyn and Harlem, one handshake at a time. I knew the streets, knew the scams, knew how dreams could turn into debts overnight. I'd told him no. He'd called me a bitter old man. And that was the last thing he ever said to me, until last night. When his name flashed on my phone earlier that evening, my throat had closed up. His voice, hesitant and strained, carried a tremor I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Dad, it's me. I know it's been too long. I don't want to waste any more time. Victoria and I miss you." He'd paused, then added softly, "We miss family." That word had done something to me. After years of silence, after birthdays missed and holidays ignored, it sounded almost sacred. "We're having dinner tonight," he said. "Victoria's making your favorite pot roast. Come over, Dad. Let's talk like before." Maybe I wanted to believe him. Maybe I was tired of being right about people. I'd spent my whole life reading faces across pawn shop counters, the desperate, the proud, the liars, and the lost. But when it came to my own blood, I still wanted to believe in redemption. So I said yes. I spent the afternoon preparing like it was Sunday service. I pulled the navy blue suit from my closet, the one Eleanor had bought for me the day Ethan graduated. "You'll need something nice for important occasions," she'd said, straightening the lapels. I hadn't worn it in years. I shaved carefully, steadying my hand, as though youth might return if I just tried hard enough. Before leaving, I opened my nightstand drawer and took out Eleanor's wedding gift, a brass pocket watch engraved with the words, "So you'll never lose time with me." I wound it once, and felt the faint click of gears, and slipped it into my vest pocket. When the car pulled up to take me north, I felt something I couldn't name. Not fear, not hope, something in between. The ride to Westchester County was a blur of headlights and silence. The city faded into manicured lawns and gated estates. When we arrived, I stared at the mansion, stone columns, fountains, and windows glowing like fire. It didn't look like the life my son had when I last saw him. It looked borrowed. A housekeeper opened the door before I could knock. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, her accent warm, but her eyes uneasy. "I'm Isabel. Please come in." Something flickered behind her expression. Gratitude, maybe fear. It vanished before I could name it. Inside the foyer was the size of my entire first floor. The air smelled of lilies and polished marble. Then I heard his voice, Dad Ethan, walk toward me, arms open, smile bright. Too bright. He hugged me longer than necessary. "You look great," he said, stepping back to study me. Before I could answer, Victoria appeared tall, elegant, a glass of wine in her manicured hand. Diamonds sparkled at her ears. "Thomas, finally," she said, kissing my cheek. "We're so happy you're here." Her perfume was sharp, expensive, and cold. "This place is impressive," I said, my voice neutral. "How did you manage all this?" Ethan laughed, quick and hollow. "Caught the market at the right time. Lucky break." "Lucky," I repeated, smiling just enough to seem polite. He guided me to the dining room mahogany table, crystal glasses silver, arranged like an exhibit. I took my seat at the head of the table, a symbolic gesture that felt more like bait than respect. Victoria poured wine with graceful precision. "To second chances," she said. "To family," Ethan added. I raised my glass, the liquid shimmering under the chandelier. But as I brought it closer, something in my gut twisted a faint bitterness I couldn't explain. That's when the phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message. Same block number. "The drink is not safe." The words hit harder than the first. I looked at the glass again, at the way Victoria's eyes followed it too closely, the way Ethan's fingers drummed against the table, restless, rehearsed. For a second, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Years of suspicion, years of running a business where trust could ruin you. Maybe paranoia was just habit, but instinct doesn't fade. "Excuse me," I said again, pushing my chair back. "Just need a moment." Their smiles stayed, but their eyes followed me all the way to the hallway. The chandelier buzzed overhead, its hum blending with the sound of my heartbeat. I checked the message again. No name, no number, just that warning. I felt Eleanor's watch ticking through the fabric of my vest, steady alive, reminding me that time was moving even when I stood still. And right then I knew something was deeply, deliberately wrong in that house. I lingered in the hallway, pretending to admire the art on the walls. Large oil paintings of nameless landscapes, expensive but soulless. Behind me, faint laughter floated from the dining room, sharp and metallic. I tried to slow my breathing to steady the tremor in my hands. That was when I saw her again, Isabel, the housekeeper. She was carrying a tray of glasses, moving quickly but not carelessly. When our eyes met, she froze for just a heartbeat. Her gaze flicked toward my pocket, where my phone still vibrated softly, and then back to me. "Everything all right, sir?" She asked, her accent soft, but her voice just loud enough for anyone listening in the next room. "Yes," I said, just catching my breath. She nodded once. "You should drink some water. The air here, it's heavy." Her words were careful, deliberate. Then she turned and disappeared into the kitchen. I stood there a moment longer, her warning echoing under my skin. When I finally returned to the table, Ethan smiled as if nothing had happened. "All good, Dad, fine," I said, forcing calm. "Just getting old." Victoria's laughter came light and artificial. "We'll have to keep you young, Thomas. Maybe a move out here would do you good." I smiled politely, the kind of smile I'd used for decades when a customer tried to shortchange me. The kind that hid thought behind warmth. They talked about real estate, about new investments, about the future. I listened, nodding when necessary. But every instinct told me they weren't just making conversation, they were circling something, preparing. Then casually, Ethan said, "Dad, you've been running those shops for what, 40 years now?" 43, I corrected. He nodded. "That's a lot to manage. 5 stores, all those employees. You ever think about slowing down?" Victoria leaned in, smiling sweetly. "You've worked so hard. Don't you ever want to rest, Thomas? Maybe let someone else carry the load." There it was. The real reason for dinner, the pot roast, the wine, the rehearsed laughter, all a prelude to this. I folded my hands together, the brass pocket watch pressing cold against my chest. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Succession Ethan said. "Planning ahead, just in case something happens. You know, power of attorney estate planning, keeping everything in the family." The word family landed like a stone in my stomach. I looked at him, at the son I'd once taught to clean jewelry, to negotiate a deal to never lie. He was smiling the way con men smile when they think they've already won. "Life is unpredictable," I said carefully, "but some things can't be handed over. They have to be earned." A shadow crossed his face. For a split second, his expression cracked, anger leaking through the charm. Victoria covered it with a soft laugh. "Of course, Thomas. We're only thinking ahead. We just want to make sure you're protected." Protected. I'd heard that word too many times from people who meant the opposite. Before I could reply, Isabel reappeared carrying a new tray. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the glasses down. I caught her eyes again, a flicker of urgency. She looked at my untouched glass of bourbon, then at Ethan's papers stacked neatly by his elbow. Her message was clear: don't drink, don't sign. I made myself smile. "Everything looks wonderful," I said. Ethan's tone sharpened just slightly. "Dad, we just want to talk about the future." Later I replied, my voice low but firm. "For now, let's enjoy dessert." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Victoria refilled her glass. "And you always were disciplined, Thomas," she said almost admiringly. "Even as a father." I smiled thinly. "Discipline keeps a man alive." As she laughed, something in her eyes hardened irritation, calculation, maybe both. We ate in silence for a few minutes, each of us pretending that everything was fine. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I waited until they were distracted before glancing down. Kitchen, 5 minutes. Alone. The message was unsigned, but I didn't need a name. When I rose from the table, Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Everything all right, just need some water," I said. In the hallway, my pulse thundered. I moved quickly toward the kitchen, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, Isabel was washing dishes, the faucet running loud to hide her voice. Without looking at me, she whispered, "Don't drink. Don't sign. They plan tonight." I stared at her. "You sent the messages?" She nodded, glancing toward the door. "They think I am invisible, but I hear everything. They want you to sign papers, power of attorney, transfer of assets. They mix something in your bourbon. To make you calm. To make you forget." I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Why are you helping me?" Her eyes shone fierce despite the fear. "Because you looked at me like a person, Mr. Bennett. You said my name. They don't. They talk about me like furniture. They don't see me. But you did." Her voice broke slightly. "You don't deserve what they plan." I felt something burn in my chest, not just anger, but shame for having doubted the world too long. "What should I do?" I asked. She reached for a dish towel and pressed something small and hard into my palm. "Take this." I copied files from their computer. Emails, contracts, everything. It's all here. A flash drive. Upstairs, she whispered, "Office at the end of the hall. There are papers, originals. Take photos. Hurry. I will keep them distracted." My hands were shaking as I hid the flash drive inside my vest beside Eleanor's watch. "You're risking your job." She met my eyes. "They already think I have none." We slipped out through the back hallway, climbing a narrow servant staircase. The air smelled of polish and secrets. At the top, Isabel opened a door. Inside was an office neat enough to be sinister. On the desk sat a thick folder stamped with legal seals. I flipped it open. Power of attorney, my name, my stores, my accounts. Every piece of my life detailed and priced. Beneath the stack were printed emails between Ethan and Victoria. "Victoria, he trusts family. The bourbon will help." Ethan, "Once he signs, we'll have Dr. Harris confirm dementia. Worth every dollar." I photographed each page, my fingers cold, my breathing shallow. Then footsteps echoed in the hall. Isabel's eyes went wide. "Hide," she hissed. I ducked into the closet just as the door opened. Through the slats, I saw Ethan enter. He scanned the room, his expression sharp. He moved closer to the desk, touching the papers like he was counting them. "Mr. Ethan," Isabel's voice floated in from the doorway, steady but careful. "Mrs. Victoria asked me to check the towels upstairs." He turned sharply. "What are you doing here?" She said to prepare the room in case your father stays. He frowned. He won't. Of course, sir. He hesitated, then left muttering. The door closed behind him. When I emerged from the closet, sweat clung to my skin. I wanted to collapse, but there was no time. We retraced our steps down the stairs. Back in the dining room, Victoria and Ethan looked up as if nothing had happened. My seat waited my glass of bourbon still untouched. Ethan smiled. Dad, we were just talking about the paperwork. Let's finish while you're here. I sat slowly, my heart pounding. Maybe later, I said. Dessert first. Victoria's smile flickered. Of course, but I could feel the tension crawling across the table. The trap was closing, and I was running out of time. I looked down at the bourbon, the faint swirl of sediment catching the chandelier light. I smiled faintly and thought of Eleanor's words from long ago. Discipline keeps a man alive. That night, it was the only thing that did. The rest of the dinner passed like a slow duel fought behind smiles. Ethan talked about expansion, profits, opportunity. Victoria filled the silence with laughter that sounded rehearsed. I nodded when required, answered when expected. All the while, the flash drive pressed against my chest beside Eleanor's watch, warm with purpose. Every word they spoke had two meanings. Future meant ownership, family meant control, and love that meant leverage. When dessert arrived, I pretended to be distracted by the sweetness. Victoria poured coffee, her tone almost casual. Thomas, we've actually printed a few things. Just drafts, really. Ethan thought it would help to see it on paper. Ethan slid a folder across the table, the same beige shade as the one upstairs. The top page bore my name in bold letters. Power of attorney. I looked at it for 3 seconds, long enough for them to think I was reading short enough to make them nervous. Then I smiled faintly and said later, I like to finish my coffee while it's hot. A small muscle in Ethan's jaw twitched. He lifted his glass, pretending to toast, but his hand shook. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, her charm cracking around the edges. I'll be right back, I said, standing. No one stopped me. They couldn't. The predator never suspects the prey once it's already in the trap. I went to the kitchen again. Isabel was waiting, her movements precise and silent. She had washed the same plate twice. Without looking up, she murmured, Did you get it? I nodded. Photos, everything. And the flash drive. She dried her hands and whispered, The police. I sent a message already. My cousin works at precinct. He called them. You have to stall. Stall, keep them busy. Do not let them make you sign. Help is coming. My breath steadied. You're risking a lot for a man you barely know. She met my eyes, then tired eyes, but honest. No, for a good man. For the first one who said my name. There was no time for gratitude, only action. I adjusted my tie, pocketed the towel she'd used to pass me the drive, and returned to the table. Ethan smiled too quickly. Dad, we really should talk about these forms. Of course, I said, sitting down. But before we do, tell me something. He blinked. What? Where did the money come from? His expression faltered. What money for this house? These cars, this lifestyle? I gestured around. Pawn shops don't pay for marble foyers. Victoria's smile tightened, her eyes flicking to Ethan, like a cue from a play gone wrong. Real estate, she said smoothly. We made smart investments. I've been in business my whole life, I said evenly. I know when someone's lying about profit margins. Ethan's fingers drummed the table fast, anxious, betraying him. Dad, this isn't about that. No, I agreed quietly. It's about who you've become. The silence stretched long enough for the chandelier to buzz again. Then mercifully, the doorbell rang. 3 short chimes. Victoria looked confused. Who's that? Ethan frowned. We're not expecting anyone. I sat back, heart steady now. Stall, Isabel had said. I didn't need to. The timing was perfect. A murmur came from the foyer. Heavy footsteps. Then voices, firm, official. Ethan rose, alarm flickering in his eyes. Stay here, he told Victoria. He disappeared down the hallway. I used those seconds to pull out my phone, slipping it under the tablecloth. The screen lit with a single new message. They're here. Stay calm. From the kitchen, Isabel emerged, pretending to collect plates. Our eyes met briefly enough for me to understand. She'd done it. When Ethan returned, 2 uniformed officers followed him. His smile was strained. Dad, he said, apparently there's been some kind of Mix-up. Mix-up, I asked. The older officer spoke first. We received a call about possible coercion and attempted fraud. Mr. Bennett, would you mind stepping aside for a private conversation? Ethan's face drained of color. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Who called you anonymous tip, the younger officer said. Multiple messages with attachments, emails, legal drafts. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was unfolding exactly as planned. Victoria stood slowly. Officers, there must be some misunderstanding. My husband would never. The officer lifted a hand. We just need statements. Mr. Bennett, you're free to go home tonight, but we'll need you to provide identification and any relevant evidence you might have. Ethan turned to me, eyes wide, voice desperate. Dad, you can fix this. Tell them you misunderstood. Tell them this was just family paperwork. I rose, meeting his gaze, calm, silent, immovable. Family doesn't drug their own blood, I said quietly. Family doesn't forge signatures. He flinched as if struck. The officers escorted him out of the room for questioning. Victoria followed, still protesting. Isabel stood frozen by the doorway, her hands clasped, trembling. I walked to her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You did the right thing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. You go now, Mr. Bennett. You're safe. Safe. The word felt strange in my mouth, foreign, fragile. Outside cold air hit my face like absolution. The red and blue lights pulsed against the white stone of the mansion, washing it clean of lies. I waited near the car until one of the officers approached. We'll need your statement tomorrow, sir. You should get some rest. Rest? I hadn't rested in years. The ride back to Queens was silent. The driver didn't speak, and I didn't either. My hands stayed folded over Eleanor's pocket watch, its steady rhythm echoing everything I hadn't said. By the time we crossed the bridge, dawn had started bleeding into the sky. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the familiar smell of home coffee dust memory. The kitchen looked exactly as I'd left it, small and imperfect, but honest. I sat at the table and took out the flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop, watched the folders appear one by one. Contracts, emails, messages. Proof of betrayal typed out in black and white. I copied everything to an external drive, then called Stephen Callahan, my attorney of 40 years. He answered on the third ring. Groggy. Thomas, it's 5 a.m. I know, I said, but I need you. Within minutes, my calm returned. I explained everything, the dinner, the messages, the drugged bourbon, the forged documents. He listened without interruption, his lawyer's silence sharp and focused. Finally, he said, don't go anywhere. I'll contact the DA's office myself. This isn't just attempted fraud, Thomas. It's conspiracy and attempted poisoning. We'll move fast. When I hung up, the first light of morning crept through the curtains. I reached into my vest pocket, took out Eleanor's watch, and listened to its ticking. She had once told me, the world will test you when you least expect it. Just remember, silence can be armor. I smiled faintly. Tonight's silence had been exactly that, my shield, my weapon, my proof. And as the city woke around me, I realized something else. They hadn't just tried to steal my money. They tried to erase my story, but I was still here, still breathing, still owning every second of time Eleanor had left me. And before this was over, the world would know the truth, every last word of it. Morning came heavy and gray, the kind of sky that makes the city feel older than it is. I hadn't slept. The coffee pot gurgled as if echoing the sound of my thoughts, low, relentless, unfinished. The evidence sat beside me on the kitchen table. The flash drive, printed photos, and my old brass pocket watch ticking steady like a heartbeat that refused to give up. At 8 sharp, my phone rang. Stephen Callahan didn't waste time. Thomas, the DA's office has opened a preliminary case. The police already impounded the documents from the mansion. They'll need your statement in person today. I'll be there, I said. He hesitated. And Thomas, I need to tell you something before you hear it elsewhere. Ethan's in custody. They found sedatives in your bourbon glass, lab confirmed. Victoria is cooperating with investigators. She's blaming him. I closed my eyes. Of course she is. Do you want to see him before the arraignment? No, I said, then softer, not yet. The courthouse in downtown Brooklyn smelled of paper, coffee, and nerves. Cameras flashed when I arrived, but I kept my head down. Stephen guided me through the back entrance. Let me do the talking. he whispered. Just tell the truth when they ask. Truth, that was the easy part. It was believing it still mattered that was hard. Inside a small crowd gathered lawyers, clerks, a few reporters, whispering headlines under their breath. At the far end of the hall, two officers led Ethan in his hands, cuffed his suit, wrinkled his face pale. For a moment he looked up and saw me. The flicker in his eyes wasn't guilt, it was panic. Dad, he said hoarsely as they sat him down, this isn't what you think. Please just listen. I listened last night, I interrupted quietly. That was enough. Victoria sat a few rows away, composed as glass, her lawyer murmuring beside her. When our eyes met, she looked away. The hearing began. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Brooks, stood and read the charges: attempted fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. The words echoed off the courtroom walls like gunfire. Stephen rose next, his tone calm and surgical. Your Honor, my client provided law enforcement with direct evidence of this conspiracy, including digital communications, physical documents, and witness testimony corroborated by Ms. Morales, the housekeeper. He's here to ensure justice, not vengeance. The judge nodded. Understood. We'll proceed. Ethan shifted in his seat, his hands trembling slightly. When given the chance to speak, he stood. His voice cracked. Dad, I was desperate. You don't understand, I owed people. Dangerous people. I thought if I could just... I stopped him with a look. If you could just steal from me, drug me, erase me, his voice broke. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said. You didn't just try to take what I built. You tried to take the only thing I had left, my dignity. For a second, the room fell utterly silent. Even the judge seemed to pause. Ms. Brooks turned to the bench. Your Honor, the prosecution moves to admit Exhibit C, the recorded emails between the defendants. Screens flickered to life. The messages I had read in that mansion now filled the monitors for everyone to see. The bourbon will make him relaxed. 2 milligrams. He'll sign without realizing. Each word sliced through the room like cold steel. Ethan lowered his head into his hands. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. Enough. We've seen sufficient cause for full criminal proceedings. Bail denied. Mr. Robinson will remain in custody pending trial. When the gavel struck, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like a tomb closing. That evening, I walked out of the courthouse into the thin sunlight. Reporters shouted questions. How does it feel? Do you forgive him? But I said nothing. Words were too cheap for the moment. Stephen caught up with me on the steps. You did the right thing, Thomas. I nodded slowly. Doing the right thing doesn't feel right. Justice rarely does, he said. Back home, the house felt different. Not empty, just still. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes down the cracked sidewalk. Their laughter floated through the open window, sharp and alive. The phone rang again. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Bennett, a man's voice said, low calm with an accent I couldn't place. Your son owes money. Large money. If he cannot pay, others will. My spine stiffened. You should know the police are involved. Everything is documented. If anything happens to me, they'll find you first. A pause, then a small, humorless chuckle. Smart man. Still not every debt is written on paper. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment. Then I called Stephen again. They're still out there, I said. Whoever lent him that money. I'll notify the detectives, he replied. They'll add extortion to the case. Good, I said quietly. But don't tell me when they find them. I don't need to know. Days turned into weeks. The story spread through the city like wildfire. Elderly businessman betrayed by his son. Headlines turned my pain into spectacle. I stopped reading after the first few articles. People I hadn't spoken to in years started calling neighbors, old colleagues, even a few customers from decades past. They all said the same thing. You were brave. Bravery had nothing to do with it. Survival did. Then one morning a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. I knew the handwriting instantly. Dad, it began, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But sitting in this cell, stripped of everything, the money, the house, the lies, I finally see what I became. You taught me to work for what I wanted. I wanted shortcuts instead. And when it all crumbled, I tried to make you pay for my mistakes. I told myself I was desperate, that I had no choice. But that was a lie. There's always a choice. I chose wrong. If there's anything left of me worth saving, it's because of you. I remember what you said when I was a kid helping in the shop. Never make a desperate man feel small. I made you small, Dad. I made you feel like nothing. And now I understand the cost. I'm sorry. Your son, Ethan. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Eleanor's Bible between the pressed lilies she'd saved from our wedding. I didn't forgive him, not fully, but I let the weight of anger start to slip. Forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about freeing myself from the noise he'd left behind. That night I locked the doors, checked the shop ledgers one last time, and wound Eleanor's watch. The gears clicked softly, the rhythm steady. The world had tested me in silence, and silence had answered louder than any shouting could. Tomorrow the trial would begin. But tonight I had already won, not by defeating my son, but by refusing to be erased by him. The courthouse was packed the day of the verdict. Reporters lined the marble steps, their cameras already aimed like rifles. The whispers inside carried the same rhythm as rain, constant, intrusive, hungry for the ending. I walked past them slowly, the same way I used to walk into my first shop every morning, calm, precise, unshakable. Stephen Callahan met me near the door. "You don't have to speak today, Thomas," he said quietly. "Your statement was enough." "I will," I replied. "Not for him. For me." Inside, Ethan sat at the defendant's table. His suit hung loose, his face pale and drawn. The arrogance that once filled his posture had drained away, leaving only a man who'd finally realized how far he'd fallen. Beside him sat his lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Across the aisle, Victoria was alone. Her hair tied back, her diamond earrings replaced by simple studs. She didn't look at Ethan. Didn't look at me either. Just stared straight ahead, her hands folded like a woman waiting for absolution. Then the doors opened again, and Isabel Morales entered. Dressed in a plain black dress, clutching her purse to her chest, she looked small, but her chin was lifted. When she walked past, I caught her whisper. "We finish it today." The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair, adjusted her glasses and began the proceedings. State versus Ethan Bennett, charged with attempted fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. Ms. Brooks, the prosecutor, stepped forward. "Your Honor, the evidence will show deliberate, premeditated intent to defraud Mr. Thomas Bennett, his own father, through the use of chemical coercion and forged legal documentation. We will demonstrate not desperation, but calculation." When she finished, Ethan's lawyer rose, already sweating. "Your Honor, my client was under extreme financial distress. His actions were not driven by malice, but panic. He never intended harm." The judge's gavel struck once. "We'll see." The first witness was Isabel. She swore in with a trembling hand, but when she began to speak, her voice was clear. "I worked for Mr. and Mrs. Bennett for 2 years," she said. "I heard them talk about Mr. Thomas's visit. They said the bourbon would make him calm, that he would sign without remembering." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ms. Brooks nodded. "Did you see the documents they planned to have him sign?" "Yes. Power of attorney, transfer of ownership of his stores and house. I copied them. I gave them to the police." "And why did you risk your job to do that?" Isabel hesitated, her eyes flicking toward me. "Because he saw me. He said my name. They never did. He treated me like a person." For a moment I had to look away. Ethan's lawyer tried to shake her testimony. "Ms. Morales, isn't it true you were dismissed from your position?" "I quit," she said. "I would not stay in a house that planned to destroy a good man." The courtroom broke into murmurs again until the judge silenced them. When Victoria took the stand next, the tension became electric. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady, but her eyes red. "I'll cooperate fully," she said. Ethan was desperate, but it was his idea. He said if we didn't do it, the people he owed would come after us both." "So you participated willingly?" Ms. Brooks asked. Victoria swallowed. "Yes, but I didn't know about the sedatives until the night of the dinner. When I saw him pour the glass, I realized what he'd done. I wanted to stop him. I didn't." Her words fell like cold rain, too late, too soft to wash the stain away. Then it was my turn. I stood, my knees stiff but steady. The courtroom quieted. I looked at the jury. 12 strangers who'd never known my wife, never seen my son as a child, never stood in my shoes. But they understood one thing. A father's betrayal needed no translation. I built everything I have with my hands, I began. Pawn shops, small deals, long nights. My wife Eleanor used to say, "Work honest, live, honest, die honest." That was all I ever wanted to pass down. My son thought that meant weakness. He thought love was a door he could walk through whenever he needed something. But love isn't debt, it's discipline. And when he tried to take that from me, I chose to fight not out of anger, but out of dignity. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. When I finished, the courtroom was silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The judge nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. You may be seated." The jury retired for deliberation. An hour passed, maybe less, maybe more. Time didn't move right inside that room. I stared at Eleanor's watch, tracing the grooves with my thumb, and thought of every second that had led here. Finally, the foreman returned. The judge asked the question, and 12 voices answered as one. "On all counts, we find the defendant guilty." The sound of that word guilty was like the release of a held breath. Ethan sagged in his seat, his face drained of color. He turned to me, eyes wide, desperate. "Dad, please. You can stop this. You can tell them I didn't mean to." I stood slowly, meeting his gaze with the calm of a man who'd already buried too much. "You stopped being my son the moment you tried to poison me." His voice cracked. "They'll kill me in prison. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to kill me in my home." The bailiff moved in, cuffing him, leading him away as he shouted my name, first angry, then pleading, then finally breaking. When the gavel fell one last time, it sounded final. After the hearing, Isabel found me in the hallway. Her eyes were wet, but her smile trembled with pride. "It's done," she whispered. I nodded. "You saved my life, Isabel." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You saved mine. Now people see me." For the first time in years, I smiled. A real one. Then maybe we both made it out alive. That night I returned home to Queens. The house smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I hung my coat, loosened my tie, and stood before Eleanor's photograph on the mantel. "It's over," I said softly. "He's gone." The room stayed quiet, but somehow I felt her there, not as a ghost, but as memory, steady and patient. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the lights of the city blink in rhythm with the ticking of her watch. Justice wasn't sweet. It wasn't even satisfying. It was simply necessary, the price of survival in a world where even love can turn against you. I had lost a son, but I'd kept my soul. And that, I realized, was enough. The weeks after the trial passed in a strange quiet. No more reporters outside the house. No more late-night calls from lawyers. Just stillness, heavy but not cruel. I started waking up early again, like I used to when the pawn shop was my whole world. I'd brew coffee, sit by the kitchen window, and watch the street come alive. Children walked to school. Buses sighed at corners. Life went on whether you were ready or not. A letter arrived one morning, postmarked from the correctional facility in upstate New York. Ethan's handwriting was shaky, uneven. I hesitated for a long time before opening it. "Dad," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see it now, the greed, the shortcuts, the cowardice. I thought success meant speed. I thought power meant control. You tried to teach me patience, and I mocked you for it. Sitting here, I finally understand that real power is time, and I threw mine away. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to Mom's memory, to myself." The letter ended simply, "Whatever's left of me, that's good, it's yours. Ethan." I read it 3 times, folded it carefully, and slid it between the pages of Eleanor's old Bible, right next to the pressed lilies from our wedding. I didn't feel forgiveness exactly, but I felt the first breath of something lighter release. That afternoon, I visited the cemetery. The autumn air was cool, clear, and full of the smell of damp leaves. I brought a bouquet of white lilies, the kind Eleanor always loved. Her name on the stone was weathered, now softened by time. I knelt and brushed the dirt away. "I thought revenge would feel loud," I said quietly. "But it feels like this quiet, steady. Like breathing again after holding it too long." The wind stirred the trees, gentle and warm. For a moment I imagined I could hear her answer in the rustling leaves. "You did right, Thomas. Now let it go." I stayed there until the light began to fade, then went home. 2 weeks later, Isabel knocked on my door. She held a small tin box. "I baked," she said shyly. "Cookies. Nothing fancy." The house felt brighter when she stepped inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd spent countless nights alone. She looked around, her gaze settling on the old photograph of Eleanor. "You loved her very much," she said softly. "Still do," I answered. She smiled. "She'd be proud of what you did, of how you stood up for yourself." I nodded, then pointed to the framed photo of the two of us in court, taken by a reporter without us noticing. "I'm proud of you too, Isabel. You risked everything to tell the truth." Her eyes glistened. "The restaurant in the Bronx hired me," she said. "They saw my story on the news. Said they want honest people like me." "That's good," I said, smiling. "But the offer still stands. If you ever want steady work, there's a place for you at one of my shops. I could use someone I trust." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered, "for making me visible." When she left, the kitchen stayed warm long after the door closed. In the following months, I rebuilt quietly. The shops returned to normal. Customers came and went. Some of them recognized me from the headlines. Most didn't. But a few would linger at the counter and say things like, "You did the right thing, Mr. Bennett." Not everyone could have stood up like that. I just nod. Doing the right thing doesn't make you heroic. It just keeps you human. I donated part of my savings to a small charity. Isabel recommended one that helped domestic workers find legal protection. I asked them to name it after Eleanor. They did. Life settled into rhythm again. Evenings were for paperwork and soft jazz from the radio. Mornings were for coffee and the steady tick of the pocket watch. Sometimes, though, when the house got too quiet, I'd open the drawer, take out the small toy car Ethan had left in the shop when he was 7. I'd set it on the mantel beside Eleanor's photo, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. Some parts of love you don't erase. You just put them where they belong. One spring morning, Isabel stopped by again, this time with her sister. They were laughing, carrying flowers from a market in the Bronx. "For the shop," she said, "to bring color." I placed them in a glass vase near the window. The sunlight hit the petals, spilling gold across the room. "Beautiful," I said. "Peaceful," she corrected. She was right. Peace had taken years, but it was finally here, not as a reward, but as something earned through every quiet choice to stand tall, stay calm, and speak when it mattered most. When they left, I stood in the doorway, watching them disappear down the street, 2 women walking into a life of their own, laughing freely. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked in perfect rhythm with the watch in my pocket. I took it out, wound it once, and listened. Eleanor's voice seemed to echo in my memory. "Time isn't something you own, Thomas. It's something you honor." I closed the watch gently. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with afternoon life, buses groaning, children shouting, the smell of fried food drifting from the corner. It was the same world it had always been, but for the first time in years, it felt like home again. I locked the door, walked to the counter, and turned the sign to open. Business could wait. Life couldn't. The lesson had cost me almost everything: a son, a family, years of faith, but it had given me something rarer in return: freedom. Not the kind you shout about. The kind that lives in the quiet, in the steady tick of a pocket watch, in the knowledge that dignity once protected can't be stolen twice. That's how the story ends, not with revenge or riches, but with an old man who finally understands that silence, when chosen, is the purest form of power. And as the doorbell chimed and a new customer walked in, I smiled, ready to begin again.